Hello again, I'm Mike Stolberger with Blue Earth County Elections, and I'm going to be providing you with some additional information about the Election Day registration process. You just completed a video on Election Day registration in a more general sense, but we wanted to give you some more specific details as they relate to Blue Earth County and how we administer this part of the Election Day process. Let me switch over to the slides and we'll continue. What we're going to cover today is a little bit more on the Election Day registration process in general to make sure you understand exactly what an EDR is. We're also going to talk about the laws and rules associated with Election Day registration. We're going to dive into the process that you should be following, and then we'll end with some resources to help you learn more about the Election Day registration process in case you would need to do additional research. We've already explained the election judge roles, and you're starting to learn more about those as you work through the videos in this sequence. However, we are going to spend this time talking about the election day registration judge role, as that's a very important role for our election judges to complete in order to make sure that only folks that are eligible to vote are voting, and more importantly, that they're voting in the correct locations. The election day registration process is essentially the way we register voters to vote in a polling place on election day. Folks can pre-register in the state of Minnesota, but if folks don't take advantage of that opportunity to pre-register, they're going to be registering in the polling place in the communities where they reside. The election day registration process is available to any eligible voter. It requires proofs, documentation, and a completed application, and it's a very important task to complete correctly. We don't want you to rush, we want you to ask questions, follow guides, and double check. If a voter gets registered in the wrong location or is made eligible to vote when they're really not eligible to vote through the registration process, there are severe consequences for the voter, and we want to help them prevent those in any instance that we can. One common pitfall that you'll see on election day, we want to make sure you don't fall for, is that you'll oftentimes have voters say that they don't need to re-register, that the information is close enough, that they might have just moved to a different apartment in the same building, or maybe they just recently got married but their name is still the same for their purposes. Those are all instances where people do need to re-register to vote. They should not sign a roster or check in under their old name or a former name or use an incorrect address in order to vote. We want to make sure that that information is getting updated. So let's talk about the rules and laws associated with EDRs, or election day registrations. The way that we want you to think about it is that there are 3 checks to complete as well as an application to finalize. The first check is that the voter must be eligible to vote. The second check is that they prove their place, their residence in the precinct. We need them to prove their face, or their identity, and then complete the application. We'll go into detail for each of these steps now. First off, to make sure the voter is eligible to vote in the state of Minnesota, we run through these series of questions. Is the voter a U.S. citizen? Are they at least 18 years of age on election day? Remember, that is 18 years of age on that election day. It's not a future date, it's not for a future election, it's that election day. They also need to be a Minnesota resident for at least 20 days prior to the election to be eligible to vote in the state of Minnesota. Note, this does not mean they need to be a resident of that specific precinct, just a resident of the state. Eligible voters must also be finished with all parts of a felony sentence if they were convicted of a felony. This includes probation or anything like that. Those requirements are very, very detailed and specific to the individual, and so it's up to that individual to speak with their probation officer or attorney or some other official to verify their status in regards to felony sentences. There is a hotline available on election day if we do need to provide additional assistance, but we do not interpret folks' felony sentence status. Final eligibility requirements are tied to guardianship and court orders. A person can vote while under guardianship unless the judge specifically revoked the right to vote. And a person cannot vote if a court has ruled that they are legally incompetent. So those are the requirements to be eligible to vote. If a voter meets those requirements, then we move on to the next step, and the next step is to prove their place. For Blue Earth County purposes, to make it easier for election judges to understand it, we say let's check their eligibility, and then let's check their face and their place. And in order to verify this place piece, we're going to use the precinct finder that's available on the poll pad or the paper copies that are provided in your precinct to first off make sure the voter is in the right location. Based on the address they provided, we need to make sure they're in the right precinct. Don't allow a voter to say that they're in the right location and skip by this step. We need to verify that. Quite frequently, voters will verify their place by using a current Minnesota driver's license, permit, or ID card, or a receipt for any of the above. This must have their current address to be used to verify their place, and it can also prove their face as it does have their picture on it. Other proofs of place include a tribal ID if it has the name and current address, as well as signature, picture, and it's from a federally recognized tribal government. And any of the following can also be used to verify a voter's place, as long as it has the voter's name, address, and is current within 30 days before or after the election. These forms of place verification can be on paper or be in digital format available on somebody's phone or other device. Examples included in this list of other place identifiers are utility bills, sewer water bills, a residential lease, provided that the lease is actually valid for that individual on election day, phone bills of all types, TV bills of all types, internet bills, banking and credit card statements, rent and mortgage statements, and student fee statements. As you can see, there's a long list of ways for voters to verify their place or where they reside in that precinct. The most common is the current Minnesota driver's license or permit or ID card, however. Once we've verified the voter's eligibility, verified they're in the right location and can prove their residence in the precinct, we move on to verify their identity. We verify their face by making sure that we can match the name on the document from their place identifier to their face document. What I mean by this is that if they used a utility bill, we need to make sure their name is on that utility bill and that name matches whatever document they're using to prove their face or their identity. In Minnesota, again, the most common one is a Minnesota driver's license, permit, or ID card. And remember, that can also work as their place identifier if it has their current address on it. However, what to remember here is that even if that license is expired, it can still prove their face as long as their name is on there and their photo or picture is available. Other proofs of face, again, even if they're expired, would include a U.S. passport, a U.S. military or veteran's ID, a tribal ID card. Remembering the tribal ID card can also prove a place if it has a current address. But we also accept Minnesota University and college IDs that have photos, and Minnesota high school IDs that have photos. Remember, these may be expired, but they must have the picture and the name, and that name must match up with the place document to prove that they reside in the precinct. So we've now brought those pieces together. We've made sure the voter is eligible, we've proved their place and their residence in the precinct, and we proved their face or their identity. Now let's get them to complete the application. The application is completed on our poll pads, and so that makes our process much easier for election judges because the poll pad walks you through all of the steps. As long as you follow the on-screen prompts, answer all of the questions, and follow the instructions, you'll be able to register a voter efficiently and effectively. You'll note that the poll pad won't let you proceed without answering required questions, and it also won't let you proceed if the voter's eligibility requirements or other documentations don't line up the way they need to with state law. One thing that we remind everyone is that the poll pad will print out a voter application receipt. That needs to be signed with a pen by the voter. The election judge is also signing that application, however, they get to use the poll pad and provide their initials on screen. There are several special circumstances that would also allow a voter to register if they can't prove their face or their place with supporting documentation. The most common of these special circumstances is vouching. If a voter cannot prove that face and place concept, they can be vouched for as their election day registration. A voter who's registered in that same precinct can sign an oath attesting to the new registrant's residence, and that is again based on personal knowledge that they live in the precinct. Remember that original voter who's already registered must reside in that precinct and be able to personally know that this new person that they're vouching for also resides in the precinct. Each voucher can vouch for up to 8 new registrants on election day, and our election judges track that information on what's called a precinct list of persons vouching. That's provided in the election judge supplies for election day activities. We also want to point out that a voucher can register on election day. However, that voucher cannot have been vouched for him or herself. We call that chain vouching, and it's not allowed under state law. That earlier person, that first person who wants to do the vouching, would need to register under the more traditional paths of proving their place and their face by using current documents and other proofs. There is a voucher form on the poll pad. That is what gets completed in order to manage the vouching process. In this instance, the voter still signs the paper, the election judge still initials the screen, and here we can allow the voucher to actually sign the screen as well when they attest to the fact that they know that person they're vouching for lives in the precinct. One tip to help you out with the poll pad is to know who that voucher is first and look up that voucher, again making sure that they live in the precinct so that you can record their voter ID number. It'll help you out with the vouching process on the poll pad. There is another version of vouching called residential facility vouching. This applies to specific situations, but the process is generally the same. It only applies to residential facilities such as nursing homes, veterans homes, disability care facilities, homeless shelters, and any other similar properties. In this instance, a staff person can vouch for the residents even if that staff person doesn't live in the precinct in which that resident lives in who's being vouched for. Staff people can also vouch for an unlimited number of voters living in that facility. They are not limited to the 8 like a normal traditional vouching process is. These staff people do need to provide proof of employment in order to be a residential facility voucher. This includes showing an ID card as an employee, making sure that their name is on a list of employees that was provided in advance to your precinct, if any are made available, or providing a statement on the facility's letterhead that's signed and dated by a manager or somebody in an equivalent position stating that this person is an employee of that facility. Once that documentation is in place, remember that staff person can vouch for residents of that facility, irregardless of the number of folks, and irregardless if that person lives in the polling place, or in the precinct. There are 3 other special circumstances that we want to make you aware of. The first one is a notice of late registration. The county provides this to a voter who tries to pre-register but is too late to make the official cutoff for pre-registration status. This cutoff occurs 20 days prior to the election, and whenever possible, we'll mail a notice of late registration to that voter in the mail. That notice of late registration can be used as proof of residence and be matched up with any of the documents that can prove the face or identity of the voter in order for them to register on election day. Similarly, we can have folks register on election day with their previous registration. In this instance, the voter is already on that precinct's roster, meaning you can find them on the poll pad. However, their name and address has changed. If they've been previously registered in that precinct, but their name has changed or they moved to a new house within that same precinct, the voter is going to inform the election judge of that previous information and prove their name change if that's what's applicable in this case. And on the poll pad, then the voter's registration will be updated by the election judge rather than started new as an election day registration. That allows you to carry forward some of the information and save you some time. Remember, that only applies to a voter who's already on that precinct's roster and they're just updating their information due to a name change or an address change within that same precinct. One final special circumstance we'll make you aware of is a student ID with a college list. In this instance, students at local colleges may be on a list provided by that school. Your precinct might get that list in advance of the election, and it lists all students housed at or near a Minnesota college or university within that precinct. And the students on that list can register by showing a valid and current student ID. It has to have a photo on there, and that proves their place. And then obviously the student ID with the photo can be used as the face as well. This list is only as complete as the information provided by the school and the information provided to the school by the students. So if a student claims that they should be on the list but they're not, unfortunately they will need to use a different process in order to register on election day. So there's the basics. We need to make sure the voter is eligible. We need to prove their face. We need to prove their place. We need to complete the application. And we can do that in many various ways based on state law that we just talked about. Remember, there's a lot of information there, but the most common way for folks to register on election day is to use a current driver's license that has their current name and their current address in the precinct already on the document, and that takes care of it for most people. We just want you to be aware of those other options as they are available for voters. So let's talk through the process for you real quickly here. We start out by verifying the location of the voter. We use the poll pad's precinct finder or the paper precinct finder to make sure that that voter's address is actually in the precinct. Are they in the right location? If they're not, we're going to give them directions to the right location. We're also going to use this step to make sure that that voter is not already registered, maybe under a different name, or we've misspelled their name or something to that effect. And we always want to double check to make sure that they're not registered. It's not a good thing to re-register a voter. It requires extra work and takes more of your time. If we truly do need to register a voter on election day, then we make sure the voter meets the requirements that we've talked about. And we also make sure to ask that they have not already voted through an absentee voting process or at another location. We'll also use the poll pad to confirm that when we checked their name, it would tell us if they've already voted. Then we talk about the best path forward for that voter in election day registration. We ask what documentation they've brought, what's changed since they last voted. Is it a name change due to marriage? Did they move to a new residence? We figure out that sort of information, and that helps us determine what proofs to be asking for and how to proceed. Then we move into the proofs phase. We prove their place or their residence through any of the documentation that we talked about already that allows for that. And we document that proof on the poll pad. Remember, the poll pad is going to give you all the options for documenting the place of residence that are acceptable in Minnesota. Once we've done that, we verify the face or the identity of the voter. That is done again through the poll pad and any of the options that are available under the state. Remember, proof of place and proof of face are almost always done through a current driver's license that has the voter's name and address in the precinct. That's your common route of proving those, but remember we have many other options. If the driver's license has an old address, we can match it up with the utility or other sort of bill, for example. Our last step here is to complete the application. We follow all the prompts on the poll pad. Remember, that will help us complete the application appropriately and follow all state law. We have the voter review the voter's oath before he or she signs the receipt that prints out. After that, the voter is then checked in like any other registered voter, and a receipt is issued so that voter can proceed and actually cast a ballot. A couple other things to remember with election day registration processes. You'll need to keep a running count of any people who are unable to prove their residence. That's reported back to the state for statistical purposes. And we want to make sure that you use the incident log to document any issues. We'll talk more about the incident log in one of our wrap-up sessions here. We do want to make some election day registration resources available to you. We know that election day registration can seem like a confusing process, and there are lots of pieces to it. However, if you use the information we provided in this training, as well as these resources, you'll be able to work through that. We also want to make sure you remember that the poll pad is your ultimate resource. Take your time, read the screens, fill out the fields as appropriate, and make sure you're following the prompts. That'll keep you moving down the right path to register that voter successfully and in accordance with state law. There's also an election judge guide that's available. That'll be provided on election day, and it can be printed off or received from our offices. The election judge guide is on the website with the website listed below, and you can also see that there's registration judge pages specifically built in that election judge guide. We also want you to rely on your head judge and other experienced judges in the polling place to help answer any questions that you might have. And there are also some other tips and trick sheets that are provided that answer some of the most basic questions. You can also review this presentation or video in your portal. It's also available on our website if you want to review this section. We also have our elections office phone available during the election day, and we have folks calling with questions throughout the day to make sure that they're giving the voters the best answers. We never ever want you to make assumptions regarding a voter's election day registration process. Ask questions, get answers, be comfortable in your answers before proceeding to help that voter register on election day. Ultimately, we want everyone who's eligible to be able to vote, so we're not going to put up unnecessary roadblocks, but we do want to make sure we do what's right and follow the law. That is what we have for the election day registration supplemental information for you. We would like to make sure you know of our contact information, so feel free to use any of that information to get a hold of us if you have any other questions. Otherwise, I'm going to let you continue on with your next segment. Thanks so much again for completing your election judge training. We look forward to working with you soon.